workshop last month. We conducted the first workshop last month on April 13th. A recording of that workshop is available on our website. We will also be recording today's workshop. Danielle, it looks like you already started the recording. Thanks so much for doing that. Questions can be entered into the chat box in Zoom today, and we'll do our best to field these as time permits. If there's any questions we can't answer, we will follow up with some information about those accordingly. Comments regarding rulemaking and the topics that we're covering can be submitted to Commerce using the form that we posted on our webpage, and we'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. We really value your input and your comments and your time, so thank you so much for joining us today. We actively use this information to better shape administrative rules to meet your needs, so please continue to be engaged throughout the process. Next slide. Commerce's mission is to strengthen communities, and we do this through a broad range of policy and programs, including housing and homelessness, business assistance, community services, and energy, which is where our work is situated with clean buildings in the State Energy Office. Next slide, please. I wanted to provide introductions to our team, the Clean Buildings team here at Department of Commerce. Our entire team is dedicated to providing timely, actionable, and clear information about the state's Clean Buildings Law. My name is Emily Salzberg, and I'm the Managing Director for the Buildings Unit within the State Energy Office. Your presenters for today are going to be Luke Howard, who's our technical lead, and Annalyn Bergen, who is one of our program managers and leads our work focused on customer support and outreach. You'll also be hearing from Liz Reichert, who's our Senior Energy Policy Specialist focused on the built environment, and Annika McDonald, who's our Incentive Program Manager. Next slide. We plan to focus on two topics today, including customer outreach and technical assistance, and then also the energy benchmarking requirements. We'll be focusing today's discussion on Tier 2 buildings specifically, which are buildings between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, and all multifamily buildings over 20,000 square feet. The objectives of today's workshop are to provide an overview of what's included in the law, to gather input on industry needs for customer outreach and technical assistance, and to gather input on proposed language for energy benchmarking requirements for Tier 2 buildings. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Liz to talk a bit about rulemaking.
Thanks, Emily. Liz Reichart, I'm a Senior Energy Policy Specialist helping to coordinate this rulemaking. Just here to remind you that this is what our rulemaking workshop agenda looks like over the course of the next few months. You know, we've broken the rulemaking up thematically and planned for about one workshop per month. And after this final August workshop that you see up on your screen, you know, the opportunity for public input does not stop. We currently have and will have open comment periods both before and after this August workshop. But this is a little bit of what's on the horizon for us. Next slide. And so, you know, as I said, both before, during, and after each workshop, there will be an opportunity for public engagement, input, and feedback on the draft language. You know, our goal with this rulemaking is to be inclusive and participatory and make folks really feel seen and heard in the final rules that are put forward. So please show up. We only ask that you please be respectful. Please show good Zoom manners by using the chat and by using the raise hand feature before speaking. Next slide. All right, and now for a summary of the public comments.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annika McDonald here. This slide here provides a summary of the comments received for Tier 2 buildings. To review the full comment dashboard, you can select the link in the chat that I'm going to put over here, and you can review all of the comments that were received to date for Tier 2 buildings. Your comments are very valuable to us, and they help shape the program. If you have any questions about the Tier 2 program, please email our buildings@commerce.wa.gov. I will also put that in the chat. We welcome your questions and be happy to answer them. But the comment form really is for comments that will help influence the program. And I'm going to give you a minute here to read these comments, and then we will forward on to the next slide.
All right, thank you so much, Monica and Liz. So this slide is just a real brief review of the scope for Tier 2 requirements. Tier 2 buildings are those buildings between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, and all multifamily buildings over 20,000 square feet. There are exempt building types such as industrial and agricultural buildings. The first phase of this law is focused on reporting for benchmarking, energy management plans, and operations and maintenance programs. The first reporting cycle will take place in July of 2027. This slide summarizes the timeline of major activities required by the law. Liz reviewed our workshop schedule in sequence, which is on the left side of this timeline. So Commerce is required to have rules adopted by December of 2023, and we'll be conducting this series of webinars over the summer and into the fall. Commerce is required to complete building owner notification and also launch the Tier 2 incentive program by July of 2025. The first round of Tier 2 reporting will be in July of 2027. Commerce will be evaluating benchmarking data and has authority to adopt a performance standard for Tier 2 buildings, which would take effect in July of 2031, pending any action by the state legislature. And now I'm going to turn it over to Anna Lynn to talk about customer outreach and technical assistance.
Thanks, Emily. So now for my portion of the workshop. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Lynn Bergen, and I'm a program manager with the Clean Buildings team. As Emily mentioned, I focus on outreach and customer support. So let's take a moment to recap what House Bill 5722 instructs Commerce. The legislation instructs Commerce to provide a customer support program. The program must provide enhanced technical support for Tier 2 building owners of multifamily housing, childcare facilities, and houses of worship. The bill also instructs Commerce to prioritize under-resourced buildings with high energy use in rural communities whose tenants are primarily small businesses and buildings in high-risk communities according to the Department of Health's Environmental Health Disparities Map. And Annika, can you enter into the chat that map so people can click on that if they are interested?
Will do.
So this slide illustrates how we rely on our partners and various organizations to outreach and engage with building owners. Our partnership have been vital in how we communicate with building owners. Commerce connects directly to building owners, but also through utilities, industry professionals, work groups, associations, local government entities, businesses, and property management companies. We want to ensure that we reach all building owners that are required to comply. So please provide suggestions to help us identify outreach gaps by submitting comments or taking the poll we'll be setting up in a few slides. So for Tier 1 buildings, we've employed several strategies to reach out to building owners, to include targeted outreach, such as building owner notification, utility and industry partnerships, work groups, saying yes to all requested meetings and presentation, actively updating our digital communications, such as websites, bulletins, and social media, publish guidance documents, and of course, the incentive program for building owners to incentivize them to comply early. So we expect to continue these strategies and stack on a little more because we have additional funding, including more rounds of building owner notification and stakeholder engagement, adding digital communications such as an interactive dashboard, and targeted outreach to under-resourced building owners and small businesses. And for that, we would like your suggestions on input on how we can reach these under-resourced building owners and small businesses. So let's move on to technical support. This illustrates the flow of technical support. We can't reach everyone, so we rely on a network of organizations to provide support to try to reach as many building owners as possible. It takes a village. So here we have the Clean Buildings team and the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. We publish guidance and address frequently asked questions and to address frequently asked questions and to help explain how building owners should comply with the standard. Through a network of organizations, we're able to engage and support even more building owners. So allow me to go over the current services we provide and explore some ideas we have. So we have a customer management system. When an individual submits a customer support ticket, it's routed into an inbox and then assigned to the appropriate staff member. And as mentioned earlier, we created guidance documents that are found in the document library. They're used to address those frequently asked questions and help kind of interpret the standards to help building owners comply with the standard. So live Q&A sessions, we love live Q&A sessions because it gives us the chance to engage with building owners and industry professionals, learn from them, and give them the space to ask questions and learn about others, what others are asking. We provide targeted trainings and webinars. We maintain industry partnerships that provide technical assistance. We find it extremely valuable to maintain these partnerships with these organizations, contractors, consultants, and trade professionals that support our building owners with compliance. Training videos and recordings. Every one of our webinars and workshops, Q&A sessions, they're all recorded and they will continue to be recorded. They live in our Clean Buildings YouTube channel, although we haven't gone viral yet. Hopefully, if we do, it'll be for a good reason. So we also have a directory of qualified energy auditors and qualified persons. Some of our ideas. So in the future, we hope we can provide an actual training program, enhanced benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance support. Some more targeted training for under-resourced building owners and small businesses, and workforce development by connecting with fellowship programs. Again, we ask for your suggestion to help us provide quality support by submitting your comments and taking the poll that we'll be setting up shortly. So here's that poll that I was talking about. Danielle, can you set that up? And we'll take a short break. Let's see, what time is it? It's 10:15. Let's do 10:25 or 10:20. And we'll take a break. You can have time to do the poll, and then we'll dive right into the energy benchmarking. Thanks everyone for participating in the poll. If you were unable to participate in the poll, please submit your comments through the comment forum. I'm going to go over that at the end of during our next step slide. So it looks, Danielle, can you give me some information about some of the results of the poll? Which do you see that people voted as most effective?
Yeah, would you like me to post or show the results on the screen?
Sure. I'll stop sharing.
Annalyn, not sure how closely you're tracking the chat, but it looks like there was quite a few people that didn't have enough time to complete the poll. So I'm wondering if we want to do just a quick interim check about what we saw and then repost the poll, or how you want to accommodate that.
Okay, we'll show what we have now, and then we'll relaunch and we'll keep it open until the end of the presentation.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Danielle, can you show the results?
policy. This,
What we see is, it says outreach and technical support, and then a bunch of bubbles, not the result.
well,
Oh, sorry.
the screen share is working then. Did you share results? No. Okay. Well, if it's not working.
Okay. Let's, sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll just, we'll proceed with the presentation. We'll relaunch the poll, and then I'll send it back to Luke, rather.
Thank you, Annalyn. You can direct the slideshow for me. That'd be great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for participating. I'm Luke Howard. I'm the technical lead for the Clean Buildings Performance team, the Performance Standard team here at Commerce. And I'm going to kind of give an introduction on energy benchmarking through a few slides here. Once that is done, we'll kind of jump into the proposed changes to the rule to accommodate for the Tier 2 expansion of the Clean Building Performance Standard. Next slide, please. So with 5722, Commerce was charged with developing rules to accommodate, to add to 19.27A.210 of the Clean Building Performance Standard. So this would create rules for energy management planning, operations and maintenance program, development and implementation, and benchmarking for smaller buildings. So next slide, please. So who does this apply to? With 5722, kind of brought in a new tier of covered buildings. These are going to be known as Tier 2 covered buildings. And as Emily mentioned, these are buildings, commercial buildings between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, excluding parking garage areas. And it also includes multifamily buildings from 20,000 square feet on up. Next slide, please. So wanted to include a few definitions that I think will be helpful for this benchmarking workshop. 5722 added a definition for baseline energy use intensity, which, as you can see, is the building's energy use intensity that is representative of a normal weather year. Additionally, we have proposed language to define benchmarking. There is a lot of use of the term benchmarking within the standard currently. We wanted to provide a definition. So this is a proposed definition that represents the term benchmarking. We obtained this from the Department of Energy. Next slide. Few more terms. Complex, it's a group of buildings interconnected by conditioned spaces on contiguous property. This is a term that was previously defined. So for Tier 1 buildings, it has been used. We have added a definition, or proposed to add this definition for contiguous property to kind of help further define building complex. So this would be adjoining property under sole ownership. We'll speak a little bit more of that when we get to the actual rulemaking proposals. An energy accounting system is a term used within the standard. It's a system for measuring, collecting, and documenting the building's use of energy. And for the Clean Building Performance Standard, we use Energy Star Portfolio Manager as that energy accounting system. And lastly, for terms and definitions, I wanted to highlight there's SB 5722 also introduced a definition for multifamily residential buildings, which you can see noted here. Next slide, please. So what is benchmarking? This is the definition of benchmarking from the Department of Energy. It's the practice of, and I'm going to just highlight some areas here, the practice of comparing the measured performance of a building to itself, its peers, or established norms. So within the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, that means creating an energy use intensity of the building as it performs and comparing it to an energy use intensity target as defined by the standard. Next slide. So how does one benchmark? Well, in accordance with the Clean Building Performance Standard, the section 5.2 covers the creation of an energy use intensity for an individual building. Again, Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the energy accounting system that the standard uses to perform this. Secondly, you want to develop an EUI target or an EUIT, energy use intensity target. So section 7 of the standard highlights this. Table 7-2A is where the energy use intensity targets are for specific building activity types. So this will give you something to compare your building's performance to. And the EUI targets are based off of mean energy use intensity data for specific building activity types. And then we've got reporting and documentation. So benchmarking is reported within the energy management plan, and also within Form C, which is derived from the Energy Star Portfolio Manager account. And we will have specific administrative reporting requirements for Tier 2 buildings. At this point, we proposed to call that Annex Y of the standard. Currently for Tier 1 requirements, Annex Z is used for the administrative reporting requirements. Next slide, please. So the energy accounting system, as mentioned, is Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We do have instructions and links to further instructions on how to establish the Portfolio Manager account. So please visit our website for more details there. Next slide. So EUI within the Clean Building Performance Standard is based on the net energy concept as outlined by ASHRAE Standard 100. So this allows for buildings to create an EUI that gives them credit for any renewable energy sources exported from the site back to the grid. So all metered energy coming into the building will be summed, and any renewable energy sources, energy exported from the building can be subtracted from the imported energy to reflect the net energy EUI for the building. Next slide. So as mentioned, targets are developed per section 7 of the standard. So again, they are developed for comparison to the baseline energy use intensity. And for Tier 2 buildings, those targets aren't needed to be met. It's just a method for comparing the building as it performs to established norms. And targets, we have some tools available for help creating those targets. There's an Excel spreadsheet that you can obtain from our website, and our data portal also has the capacity to create energy use intensity targets for specific buildings. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background of what utilities' role are. one of their roles is to provide energy data to their customers. If the utility serves over 25,000 customers, they are required by law to upload energy data directly into portfolio manager accounts upon the account holder's request. For utilities serving less than 25,000 square feet or 25,000 customers, they are required to submit energy consumption data to the building owner via Excel format for the owner, building owner, and the account holder to upload to their Energy Star portfolio manager account. Oh, and additionally, any buildings with 3 or more tenants, the utility company can send aggregate data directly into portfolio manager or in Excel format to the building owner without the need for any kind of agreement or waiver with those tenants. All right, so proposed benchmarking amendments. Now, this is when we're going to jump into the actual draft proposals for amendments to the current rules.
Thanks, Luke. I'm going to show everyone where to access it from our homepage. This is our Clean Buildings website. If you scroll all the way down, you'll see the registration information and links to some of the materials for the workshop. Here you'll see, let me enlarge this a little more. This proposed benchmarking language. If you haven't done this, you'd click on it. And then although it looks like you would need to sign up for a Box account, you just hit download. It will download without you having to log in or create an account. And here it is. Let me set this up.
Great.
For
Perfect. So just a little summary of the background on rules development for Senate Bill 5722. So Congress is authorized by Senate Bill 5722 to develop amendments to the Clean Buildings Performance Standard to include requirements for commercial buildings between 20 and 50,000 square feet and multifamily buildings over 20,000 square feet. So these buildings are known as Tier 2 covered buildings. So Tier 2 requirements shall include benchmarking and implementation of an energy management plan and an operations and maintenance program in accordance with the standard. So what we're doing today is reviewing proposed amendments for benchmarking requirements for Tier 2 buildings. So the following draft rules are just that, the proposed amendments for Tier 2 buildings. Energy management plan and operation and maintenance program draft rules will be reviewed in our next rulemaking workshop. And Commerce welcomes comment on these proposed rules, as mentioned before, and we'll accept comment up to 2 weeks or so after this workshop. So we want to hear comments. We kind of like to have some boundaries on timeline here so we can deal with and attend to comments for each relevant workshop. All right, so a little bit about the formatting of this proposed rules. So we typically will copy the entire subsection that is to be edited. We underline the text to indicate additions, strike through any text to indicate deletions, and for any new sections, provide suggested location in the document by referencing the previous section. But if you are proposing some comments or changes, please provide a reason statement for the change or for the comment. A little bit here about what you'll notice for the legend here to understand these proposed amendments. Anything in black font is from the ASHRAE Standard 100 as it's written. Blue font represents the amendments for Washington State's Clean Building Performance Standard, or WAC 194-50. So these are the amendments already made. Red font are to track changes showing draft additions, so that would represent the tier 2 rulemaking process. And any comments identify amendment justification or source reference. So when you download this document, you will see those comments.
Thanks, Luke. I also want to add that if the red font doesn't show, you may have to go to review and show all markups. So you'll see the comments and the changes.
Thank you, Alma. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on all of these changes. Some of them are fairly basic. Here we have in scope, adjusting the scope. So introducing the addition of multifamily residential buildings to the standard. Go ahead and go down definitions there. Again, I talked a bit about the benchmarking definition. So this is something that Commerce has proposed for tier 2 amendments, just to clarify what benchmarking means. The second one here, connected buildings, is also a definition that Commerce has proposed. And this is connected to benchmarking requirements for buildings that may share a meter with other buildings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this a proposed amendment document. Again, contiguous property was an amendment that Commerce has proposed to help provide clarity of what a building complex is. So the important thing here is that in order to be considered a building complex, the ownership needs to be of sole ownership and not multiple ownership. So for an example, if we have a hospital complex that may have a building that may be interconnected through conditioned space to the rest of the complex, but it is of other ownership, that would define a boundary between one building and another. And so again, a building complex needs to be of sole ownership. Okay, multifamily residential buildings. This again is a definition defined in Senate Bill 5722. So this will be added to the standard to provide definition for tier 2 buildings. Next slide. Okay, so in WAC 194-50, or the current rules for Clean Building Performance Standard, residential buildings from requirements from ASHRAE were not adopted because residential buildings were not part of the standard. With tier 2, it brings in the introduction of multifamily residential buildings. So Commerce has adopted and amended this section of the standard to address the requirements of 5722 for multifamily buildings. So again, we refer to section 7 for developing a target for the building, energy use intensity target, and a reference to Annex Y, which will be the future administrative report and requirement requirements for tier 2 buildings.
Luke, we have a question in the chat, and we do have some other previous questions that we will address at the question and answer time, but I wanted to mention this one because it relates to the section you reviewed. So a building that has condo owners association exempt. Sorry, let me read that again. So a building that has a condo owners association is exempt.
So, yeah, one of the intents of introducing and providing more clarity to the definition of building complex and contiguous property is to define that in a large building that may be one thermal envelope, if there's separate ownership within there, and any ownership that is below the 20,000 square feet threshold for a tier 2 building would not be subject to these tier 2 requirements. So in the case of maybe a residential condo building, where the condos, individually owned condos, are less than 20,000 square feet, those parcels would not be subject to the standard. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. That did answer the question. Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Okay, it looks like we lost our Word document. Oh, there we go. Okay, so jumping down to section 4.2 here. The proposed rules would be that tier 2 building owners are ultimately the ones responsible for establishing the energy management plan, the operations and maintenance program, and benchmarking for the building. So they can designate an authorized representative to do this work, but ultimately it's their responsibility. Whereas in tier 1, for tier 1 buildings, it's a qualified person that has that overall responsibility to developing and assuring that the development and implementation of benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance programs is achieved. So again, these changes just reflect that the building owner for tier 2 buildings is ultimately responsible. So go ahead and scroll down. You can see how this is reflected in 4.2.2 as well as in 4.3. 4.3.2, the added language just shows that tier 2 covered buildings are not required to meet the energy use intensity target as it applies to tier 1 buildings. So just specific language to clarify that within the standard. And again, we added quite a bit of the other section references, even if we didn't make changes, just for context. Scroll back up. Okay. Again, one more reference to that tier 2 covered buildings are not subject to tier 1 requirements of meeting a building performance standard. Therefore, there will be no requirements for tier 2 buildings to perform an energy audit. Section 4.4.1, we're just representing that tier 1 buildings and tier 2 buildings will have different references in the standard or annexes to refer to when it comes to administrative requirements. And we'll be presenting those administrative requirements in a future workshop. As mentioned already, Section 5 is relevant for the energy management plan and development of energy monitoring or development of an EUI. We added some language here that says for tier 2 covered buildings where measured net energy consumption data cannot be provided at the covered building level, net energy consumption data will be produced at the connected building level. So what this means is if your building is, your tier 2 building is not metered in a way that you can measure energy just for that covered building. Let's say you share that meter with a couple other connected buildings, at least connected through the energy meter. This exception would allow for creation of an EUI based on the gross floor area and energy use of all buildings connected to that meter that tier 2 covered building shares. So in reference back to our definition of connected building, this is where it's relevant. Okay, go ahead. All right, so Section 7 covers development of energy use intensity targets. Commerce has added some language here to help clarify how those targets are developed. So you'll see the term building activity type. That is specifically how we address the various different building activity types within table 7-1 and 7-2A and 7-3 as buildings with targets. So we added this language here to help clarify that building activity types are defined based on Energy Star portfolio manager property types, or as noted in table 7-1, there are a few definitions that are not defined. The building activity type definitions that are not currently codified as defined in portfolio manager or table 7-1. So Commerce will be publishing those definitions within the standard through this rulemaking process. So scrolling on down, talks about how for tier 1 buildings, it's the qualified person that develops the target. The proposal as written is that for tier 2 buildings, the building owner or the building owner's authorized representative can be creating those targets. Now, there will be potential for some tier 2 buildings not be able to create a target. They may be a multi-use building with several building activity types. And if any of those building activity types within that, or space use within that building, is not defined in table 7-1 as a building activity with a target, they may not be able to create a target in accordance with section 7 of the standard. For tier 1 buildings, that throws them down an alternative pathway, then the energy use intensity target that won't apply to tier 2 buildings since a performance metric is not required to be met. So this language authorizes or states that any target not able to be developed in accordance with section 7 can use the energy target provided by portfolio manager. And in many cases, portfolio manager will create a target for a building, which again is different than the Clean Building Performance Standards targets, but Commerce would like to have that target reported. Our plan is to have it as a data point in Form C that is already established in the standard. Portfolio manager has a specific report, Form C. This does not require any extra energy on the portfolio manager, account manager to create this target. It'll just be something that is automatically populated in Form C. All right, we can go ahead and scroll through. Most of the rest here is just more of clerical administrative changes, or excuse me, formatting changes. Table 7-2B was not adopted in the WAC 19450, and this is just to clean up. It looks like we did not strike through that and delete it from the standard previous. So this note just highlights that. We can go ahead and scroll on down. I believe the rest of these changes are just grammatical to be in alignment with some of the changes to 5722. If you scroll up.
Sorry about that. Let me
It's all right.
go back.
So you'll see, for example, there 57. Oh, don't go too far. Go down a little bit, please. 5722 changed the word 12 from a spelled out version to the numerical version. It looks like we're done with this review. I noticed something in the chat. Someone was looking to find this document. Maybe
I just posted it in the chat, Luke. It's under the proposed
Okay.
benchmarking language.
great, thank you.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll head to the chat and we'll address some questions and comments. And it is 10:54. Let's go back. Let's get back here at 11. I'm going to pause recording and then we'll continue at 11. Okay, Luke,
Thank
you want to talk
Annalyn.
about some highlights of the draft?
Yeah, I just wanted to create a couple slides that kind of drew out some of the proposed amendments that Commerce has submitted. So again, sections 4.2 and 4.3 have language added to them that would clarify that a qualified person would not be needed in order to accomplish the requirements of benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance programs in accordance with the standard. As with tier 1 buildings, they require a qualified and credentialed person to do so. Next slide. And secondly, benchmarking of what we've defined as connected buildings. You may have several buildings as illustrated in this graphic that may or may not be subject to tier 2 based on their gross floor area. So the standard would require the covered buildings. So in this graphic, there are two, there would be two in accordance with the definitions within the standard. The one that's 20K shares a meter with all the other buildings. Technically, the 30K and the 15K building would be interconnected through conditioned space for a total of 45K. And then we have that 15K building in the middle there that's not connected, interconnected through conditioned space, but it is connected through a shared meter. So the proposal is that when you have this instance, the covered buildings would create a target representing, or excuse me, not a target, an EUI representing the total GFA of all buildings connected by single meter or meters. Even if some of those buildings that are served by the meter are not technically large enough to be a tier 2 building. The aggregate of all these buildings, as you can see, would be over 50,000 square feet. That would not subject them to tier 1 requirements. This is just a way to avoid the need to submeter tier 2 covered building. So we would accept the energy use intensity derived from the total square footage and energy use of all the space sharing a meter or meters. So now I think it's got plenty of time to field questions and comments. Annalyn, I don't know who's managing the chat.
Questions for you there, Luke. Okay, first question. In clean buildings accelerators for tier 1, we were told only renewables used on site are counted for Clean Buildings Act, not renewables exported. Is this correct? And will tier 2 be the same or different?
So tier 2 is proposed to be the same as illustrated by that net energy concepts graphic provided by ASHRAE Standard 100. The net energy use means, and this is defined within the standard. Let's see if I can quote it here real quick.
You want me to show that?
Yeah, go ahead and
slide?
show the graphic, the net energy concept. And while you're doing that, Annalyn, I'll read the definition. So the sum of metered energy entering the building minus metered energy leaving the building. And then there's reference to this net energy concept. Now, there is likely confusion here because Energy Star Portfolio Manager, in order to obtain a Energy Star score, they don't use the net energy concept. And so development of the EUI for them is based off of source energy. So you cannot obtain an Energy Star score through the net energy concept, but you can create, under one portfolio manager account, you can create a net energy site-based EUI and have the ability to turn that function off in order to create an Energy Star score in accordance with portfolio manager.
Any further questions about that or more clarification? Okay, we'll move on to the next question. PSC requires authorization forms when there are 5 or less accounts. It sounds like there's their process and requirement is in violation of Washington state law. Is that correct?
Well, you know, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but you know, it seems to be contradictory to the RCW language that I showed earlier in the slide.
The next question has to do with benchmarking data coming from a utility. I don't know, I'm not sure if we want to, how you want to address that, or if we would like to just look into it further and post it on our webpage.
Yeah, I think it would be best for us to take that comment and respond to it, do some research and find out how we can best respond to it.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question has to do with condos. Condos, doesn't the HOA own the building envelope?
There may be some nuances here that would be helpful for us to fully understand in order to create the best and most representative language within the standard. So if you have some comments about how the homeownership association ownership of a building is reflected in reality, that'd be great. From what I understand, the intent of our definition of connected or of contiguous property was to exempt privately held condos from the standard, even if they are in a building that's greater than 20,000 square feet.
Thanks, Luke.
I think a hand is up. I wonder if that's to
Sure.
gain some clarity from something I just said.
Yeah, this is kind of a change of pace, I guess. We were expecting that, say like a high-rise tower with individual homeownership condominiums. So what the new wording is going to be is that building is no longer is now exempt from this.
Yeah, so what our proposal is based on current language for tier 1 buildings, identifying building complexes. Building complex is defined as a group of buildings interconnected through conditioned space on contiguous property. And as we interpret that for tier 1, that means that if buildings that are on adjoining parcels but are not of same ownership are not considered interconnected, and therefore we're applying those same standards to tier 2.
Okay.
So,
and then, so the only thing that would be covered in a association like that would be any common spaces that are over 20,000 gross square feet.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Next question. Did I hear correctly? There is no energy audit requirement for tier 2.
Correct. Yeah. I believe it's section 4.3 is the energy audit requirements for buildings without targets. That applies to tier 1. We want to be clear that energy audits are not going to be required under this rulemaking for tier 2 buildings. Just benchmarking, energy management planning, and operations and maintenance program.
Thanks, Luke. That actually answers our next question. So basically all the work is saying set up your Energy Star account and monitor your energy use. And then there was a sub comment that said you also need to complete your energy management plan and operations and maintenance plan. Next
Right.
question. We can use a connected buildings EUI when there are tier 1 and tier 2 buildings.
So that's a good question. So if you have a tier 1 building, so a building over 50,000 square feet, and it shares meter with a tier 2 building, this proposal would allow for energy use intensity development based on the combined area and energy of the tier 1 and tier 2 building. Now, again, this is just proposed language, so any comments to the proposed language would be, in a written comment would be useful.
Thank you, Luke. Next question. Are BOSNs going to be revisited for Annex Y versus Annex X? Building weekly hour use is dramatically different for small buildings versus large buildings for most building types. Same question for EUI targets.
I'm not sure what BOSN stands for. If the person proposing the question could unmute and clarify, that'd be great.
Shift normalization.
Shift normalization factors. At this point, we are not looking to amend the shift normalization factors for tier 2 buildings. Again, these targets do not need to be met. Just part of comparing to the established norm. It'll be interesting to see how different the operating hours really are. But a comment well taken.
Thank you. Are fines the same as tier 1?
Fines have not been established at this point, but no, they will not likely be the same as tier 1.
Yeah, Luke, I can
Will
add.
they be more or less?
I can add to that if that's helpful. So the information about fines included in Senate Bill 5722 gives Commerce Authority to assess penalty fines for noncompliance. It is a lesser fine. I believe it's 30 cents per square foot, not to exceed 30 cents per square foot, but I'll do a quick check here while we're wrapping up and add if that's incorrect.
Thank you.
And I do want to mention too, we did establish a progressive penalty structure for tier 1 buildings. That'll be a topic that we'll discuss as part of the administrative procedures later on in the rulemaking process. So if y'all have thoughts on fines and how we should approach that, we'd love to hear your input.
Thanks, Emily and Luke. Next question. We haven't determined the EUIT for tier 2 buildings. Since they aren't required to meet an EUIT, is this a reporting requirement now?
So this goes back to the definition of benchmarking. So the creation of energy use intensity for the building in comparison to established norms. That would be the EUIT. So the proposed language to fit that definition of benchmarking is to require the development of a energy use intensity target in accordance with Section 7 of the standard, in addition to building energy monitoring.
Thank you. Next question. Do tier 2 buildings need to be monitored and have separate EMPs/O&Ms when they are a continuous covered property?
That is a good comment for discussion for our next workshop when we discuss energy management plans and operations and maintenance programs. There is some, House Bill 1390 kind of established an allowance for compliance with the standard for tier 1 buildings through a decarbonization plan. I'm not going to go into the details of that legislation today, but one of them was to allow for an energy management plan and operations and maintenance program for the whole campus that is complying through the decarbonization plan. So that is something that we can think about and talk about in its application to tier 2 buildings.
Thanks, Luke. Next question is about the recording for this meeting. So this recording will be posted to our Clean Buildings main page. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, I posted a link there in the chat. In the past workshop materials, there you'll find the rulemaking for 5722, and you'll also see the pre-rulemaking webinar that was hosted on April 13th. This recording will also be posted in that section there too. Okay, next question. How do the EMP and OMP contribute to energy use reduction?
Well, I have heard anecdotal information about how effective operations and maintenance program and energy management plans can reduce the energy consumption of a building through some of the lowest cost. If you consider an operations and maintenance program an energy efficiency measure, it would be one of the lower cost to benefit energy efficiency measures. It gives the building operators and building owner a opportunity to look in more detail about the performance of the equipment and systems of the buildings, and to make the adjustments needed to provide better performance and longer lasting equipment. So I've heard any numbers from 5% to 15% of savings attributed to operations and maintenance programs and energy management plans. Of course, that's going to vary depending on how the building is operating at the time those programs are implemented.
Thanks, Luke. The building has an on-site backup generator for emergency power. Does it have to be metered?
So the development of an EUI would be using the meter data from imported energy, such as from the gas company or from the electric company. If you have a generator that's used for backup, you would just be using the bulk fuel used within a 12-month period for that. So that would be part of the energy use intensity measurement within the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. There is data entry for bulk fuels such as diesel.
Next question, please clarify the proposed rule change for Tier 2 qualified person requirements.
So the proposed rule for Tier 2 would be that the qualified person is not required for development of the energy use intensity, energy management plan, and the operations and maintenance program for Tier 2 buildings only. Tier 1 buildings would still be required to use that qualified person.
Luke, can I add a couple of comments?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, so as Luke mentioned, this is what we're proposing. We would love input on how to shape this in a way that works for the industry. I do want to clarify, we will have minimum training requirements for a person completing this work, but we are looking potentially at approaching this a bit differently with Tier 2 buildings. So Perry, we would love your thoughts on that, in addition to everybody else on the line.
Was happy to provide it. I've got some statistics too, Emily, that I can share with your team when it's appropriate.
That would be great. Thanks, Perry.
Next question, we have an environmental ed facility with multiple classroom and lab separate buildings, not interconnected, but conditioned spaces, however, have a single meter. Total aggregate square feet of all buildings equals Tier 2. How is this complex defined?
Right, so under the proposed language for connected buildings, if these buildings, if even just one of them is considered a tier 2 building, so 20 to 50,000 square feet. That building would be required to comply with the standard, but the EUI for that building would be an aggregate of those buildings that are metered on together on 1 meter.
Next question, if a building shares meters with other buildings, so no EUI can be determined, what does it have to do to comply with the tier 2 campus benchmark? Question mark.
Yeah, and that goes back to the previous question about connected buildings. So we proposed that definition of connected buildings so that any tier 2 building or group of tier 2 buildings that share a meter would benchmark based on the aggregate of those buildings that share the meter or meters.
Thanks. Question also related to the previous. Does the contiguous property definition affect tier 1 buildings? For example, a retail complex that is 80,000 square feet, but owned by 2 owners at 40,000 square feet each. Is this complex considered a tier 2 building rather than a tier 1?
Yeah, so again, within the definition of complex, that'll apply to tier 1 or tier 2. So if a building is not interconnected through conditioned space, or it may be interconnected through conditioned space, but they have different ownership, then the gross floor area is based on measurement is based on the ownership of the individual parcels or group of parcels.
Thanks. And also another follow-up to the previous question. Is the issue of complex ownership within a complex a new proposal for tier 2 or an interpretation, clarification of the tier 1 rules?
Can you read the first part of that again, Annika?
Is the issue of complex ownership within a complex a new proposal for tier 2 or an interpretation, clarification of the tier 1 rules?
So the introduction of the definition for contiguous property is meant to be a clarification to align with that definition of complex that's already within the standard. And it would apply to both tier 1 and tier 2.
Next question, when will the exemption criteria be available? Is that, Casey, is that question to tier 1 exemptions or tier 2?
Well, I understand tier 1 exemptions. I'm just curious if there's going to be the same exemption process in tier 2. If you have a 20,000 square foot unconditioned warehouse.
Yeah, we will be discussing those in future workshops, but it's likely to be similar, if not the same, as tier 1 requirements.
Thank you.
Emily, did you have more to add?
No, you got it. Thanks, Luke.
Okay.
Next question, Senate Bill 5722 seems to direct Commerce to consider the age of buildings in establishment of a target EUI. Will this provision of considering age be applied to tier 1 buildings as well?
You know, at this point, I don't see that it will apply to tier 1 buildings. Emily, do you have much to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll respond a bit, and Jeff, let me know if we're missing the mark with your question. So that language about considering the age of buildings and establishing targets was actually in House Bill 1257, so the original law back in 2019. Commerce did take that into account as we established targets, which is why we have different targets for newly constructed buildings as opposed to existing buildings. When we went through the public process of developing targets and doing the analysis of energy use averages by building type, we really were not able to determine or make a recommendation that those targets should be different. I think that this is an issue we've continued to hear input about over time. Commerce is going to be revisiting targets before 2029, where we're required to do so by law. So Jeff, I think the opportunity would be to talk through that a bit more in detail before that target setting happens in 2029. And the benefit of that too is we will have had a number of years of benchmarking data available to us connected to the age of the building, which will just better position us to set those targets effectively. With 5722 connected to tier 2 buildings, there is no target that those buildings are required to be met. So we won't be considering age of buildings with those targets as it relates to 5722. Establishing targets for those tier 2 buildings really is just an awareness building. As Luke mentioned, it's really giving a benchmark to compare those that building's energy usage to. So Jeff, let me know if I missed the mark with that question. Luke, anything you want to add, feel free.
Oh, if I could translate in terms of my listening, Emily, it sounds like you don't intend to take the age of the building into consideration for the analysis you can do for tier 2, but you will have data for tier 1 when you go through the second iteration of looking at target EUIs to possibly consider age relative to the reporting that's done for tier 1. Is that what I heard you say?
That's correct, Jeff. And we're not developing targets for tier 2 buildings specifically. We're just asking that targets be developed based on the tier 1 targets we have. And again, it's informational. It's giving you something to compare against.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Next question. At some condos, there may be an owner that owns multiple units that are over 20,000 square feet in total. Would they need to meet the compliance?
That's a good question, maybe. I think we would have to consider each one individually and how it relates to the definition of complex. So interconnected through conditioned space on contiguous property. So if a condo owner had several condos that were interconnected through maybe the lobby conditioned space, and it equated to greater than 20,000 square feet, it's likely they would be subject to tier 2 requirements.
Thanks, Luke.
Luke, just a couple of additions. As far as condos go, based on the comments we've received this morning, this is a particularly tricky issue. And I want to be really clear that the answer is it depends. Many buildings are constructed in different ways. The ownership structure looks different. So this is an area that we are currently evaluating and would welcome input and comments on. And I also do want to clarify, an important part of this process too is getting input from our legal review. So we're providing information based on the best information we have available right now and what we understand to be the intent of the law. And I just want to be really clear that we'll continue to finalize that process as we move through rulemaking. And Ryan, we see your hand. I wonder if that's a clarifying question. Do you want to come off of mute?
Yeah, it was actually, so for if we have issue with one of the targets that are set up, what's the best pathway to engage with you guys around that? International airports are defined as transfer stations, which I would understand would mean a bus station and a train station and things like that. And we're having some communication with airports right now where the EUI target is, at best 61, and it's really, really low. And there's no way to come into compliance, even with really well-established building automated systems. The only pathway is pretty massive renewable energy systems. So wanting to kind of revisit that with commerce, what's the best avenue someone would take if they were having issues with one of the targets?
Now, Ryan, I assume this is for a tier 1 building, correct?
Yeah, actually, sorry, that is tier 1. Yeah.
Yeah. No problem. Yeah, I think just, my preliminary response to that is we developed the targets as part of rulemaking using a very robust public process and got input on that. If there's particular building types that are tricky or maybe miss the mark, like reach out, let's have that conversation. We're not in a position right now, though, to amend those targets. We'll be doing that in 2029. So options you would have available is to reach out to us. Let's talk through the specific circumstances of that building. Pursuing the investment criteria pathway would be an option, in addition to a few other mechanisms we have in place with administrative procedures. So it's very specific to different circumstances. So please reach out and we can talk through that.
Next question. I haven't seen building age in the tier 1 equation. Where is the original CBPS? Where is it in the original CBPS? Does it stipulate this? And then Judy posted in the chat, section 7.2.1.1 is where you find that information. And then next question, can you show your picture again and explain interconnected, please?
Okay. So this specific graphic was placed here to kind of represent a connected building, which is not to be confused with the term interconnected from the definition of complex. But let's imagine here that this is also a building complex, or part of this is a building complex. So depending on the makeup of the building, and again, as Emily stated, there are a lot of different nuances to how these buildings are defined, but a complex, you see the two buildings on the right, 30K and the 15K. Technically, they are interconnected through that conditioned walkway between the two. And if they are of single ownership, then that would be a 45,000 square foot building in the eyes of the Clean Building Performance Standard. If the two adjacent buildings, that 45,000 square foot complex and the 15K building, were not interconnected through conditioned space, then they aren't necessarily going to be one whole complex, even though that they may be of the same ownership. Now, keep in mind, the building thermal envelope is defined as the space that encloses the building. If that wall between the two 15K buildings is not a thermal barrier, it may by nature just be interconnected because it is directly or indirectly heated by the space next to it.
Thanks, Luke. Next question, can you show the rulemaking timeline from the beginning of the presentation again, or post to the link to the timeline?
The slide deck will be available. So all of this information will be
Fantastic.
available
Yeah.
on the website. For this specific slide deck, this specific timeline, it is on where it explains each tier, and I will show that in shortly. But
That's it for questions in the chat.
okay, great. Thanks, Annika. I'm going to go through next steps. And sorry to click through like this.
I'm having visions of the rewind and fast forward buttons. VHS is Donna Lynn's. It's a great blast from the past.
Okay, let's go back. Sorry about that. Next steps. So the workshop is recorded, as we said, the slide deck and the recording will be posted on the website, and it will be emailed to those who registered. So if you don't have time to look into the website, you'll get an email when the link is available. The proposed rules are already posted, and I'm going to show you how to get there again. So please take some time to review the material, submit comments if you need to listen to the recording and what we said all over again, you'll have that opportunity. Lastly, our next workshop is on June 15. Please register and look out for the proposed rules. They will be available about a week before the workshop. And while I still have your attention, I'm going to show you where to get a little bit about where things are. So here's the website. Here's that additional timeline for tier 2. You can see it here. This is a little less detailed, but if you go to the home page and you go down, you'll start to see the materials being posted down here under past workshop material, and you'll see the last one. And then for comments, we're doing it a little differently. Before, we would have you submit it via email, which is still available, but it's just helpful with the amount of volume that we're receiving to submit it using the form. So if you click on the form, it looks like this. And this link is going to be for all workshops. And you can attach a file. So when you look at the Word document and you make your comments, just save it and attach it to this form, and it'll be so helpful while we try to sift through all the comments we receive. And I think that is all of it. We just like to thank you for your time and your attention, and we appreciate all of your input. You guys have a great day.